For 7 nights, Odette Crain slept in the parking lot of a Walmart off Highway 61, with her 2 boys curled up in the back seat of a 2009 Chevy Malibu that had a cracked rear window held together with duct tape and a prayer. She was 41 years old. She had a nursing license, a resume, and $14 in her checking account. The boys, Marcus was 9, Tobias was 6, thought they were on an adventure. That was the story she told them the first night, when she pulled into the lot and cut the engine and said, "Okay, we're going to try something fun." Marcus had looked at her in the rearview mirror with those serious eyes he got from his father and said, "This isn't fun, Mom. This is a parking lot." And Tobias, who was 6 and believed everything that came out of his mother's mouth, clapped his hands and said, "Are we camping?" She said yes. She said they were camping. By the 3rd night, Marcus had stopped asking questions. By the 5th, he'd started folding Tobias's jacket into a pillow without being asked and tucking it under his brother's head before they fell asleep. He was 9 years old, and he already knew not to make things harder for her. That was the part that broke her every time she thought about it later. Not the hunger, not the cold, not the shame of it. It was her 9-year-old deciding, on his own, that it was time to grow up. Here is how Odette had ended up in that parking lot. 18 months earlier, she'd been working nights in the cardiac unit at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Memphis, Tennessee. It wasn't glamorous work. No nursing job is, despite what people imagine. But she was good at it, and she knew she was good at it, and there is a particular quiet dignity in being skilled at something that matters. She had an apartment on Mill Branch Road, nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a small patch of yard where Marcus liked to kick a soccer ball against the fence. She was paying her bills, she was feeding her kids. She was fine. Then her mother got sick. Loretta, her mother, was 63 and living alone in a rental house in Tunica, 40 minutes south, and the diagnosis was breast cancer, caught late. Not terminal, the doctor said, but serious. Serious enough that she couldn't drive. Serious enough that she couldn't cook or clean or manage her medications without help. Serious enough that Odette started making the drive after her night shifts, spending a few hours helping her mother before driving back to Memphis in time to get the boys to school. She did that for 4 months. She was running on 3 hours of sleep a night, and she knew it. And she kept telling herself it was temporary. It wasn't temporary. By the 5th month, she'd had 2 near accidents on the highway, both times jerking awake at the wheel. She requested a schedule change at the hospital, days instead of nights, so she could be more useful to her mother in the evenings. The charge nurse said she'd look into it. 2 weeks passed. Then, another nurse with more seniority requested the same shift, and that nurse got it instead. Odette asked again. She was told there was nothing available. She was told to be patient. She was not patient. She was exhausted and scared, and she made the mistake of being too honest in a meeting with her supervisor. She used the word unfaith, talking about her own fatigue. And 2 weeks later, she was written up for a documentation error that, on any other day, would have been a verbal correction and nothing more. She knew what it was. She filed a complaint with HR. HR did nothing. She resigned in March. She told herself she would find another position quickly. She had experience. She had references. She had, she believed, enough savings to cover 3 months. She had not accounted for her mother's hospital bills, which began arriving in thick envelopes that she shoved into a drawer, and then, when the drawer became too full, into a cardboard box, as though putting them out of sight could put them out of existence. By June, the savings were gone. She'd applied to 11 hospitals, 4 urgent care facilities, a home health agency, and a private practice. She'd had 3 interviews and no offers. She found out later, from a colleague who knew someone on a hiring committee, that St. Catherine's had flagged her file. Not officially, not in any way that left a paper trail. Just quietly, the way those things happen, a word dropped in the right ear. She's a problem. Move on. She lost the apartment on July 3rd. She had 1 week's notice and nowhere to go. Her mother's rental house had 1 bedroom. Her sister in Nashville had 3 kids of her own, and a husband who had made it clear, in the polite way of people who want to say no without saying no, that it wasn't a good time. So she packed what fit in the Malibu, put the rest in a storage unit she paid for with her last credit card, and pulled into the Walmart parking lot off Highway 61 and told her boys they were camping. She'd chosen that Walmart because it was open 24 hours. The bathrooms were clean enough. No one questioned a car sitting in the far corner of the lot if it wasn't blocking anything. She'd done her research, the way you do when dignity requires you to be practical about indignity. Every morning she dropped the boys at the public library on Poplar Avenue when it opened at 9. It wasn't ideal. Marcus was old enough to notice the looks from other patrons, old enough to feel the weight of sitting somewhere simply because there was nowhere else to sit. But there were books, there were computers, and there was air conditioning. She'd spoken to one of the librarians, a woman named Helen, and said only that they were going through a transition. Helen had nodded and not asked follow-up questions, and Odette had been more grateful for that than she'd been able to say. Then she drove to the hospital district and worked per diem shifts at a staffing agency that placed nurses in facilities that needed coverage. The pay was inconsistent. Some weeks it was almost enough. Some weeks it was half of almost enough. She kept applying for permanent positions. She kept not getting called back. On the 7th night, it rained. Not a light rain, a Memphis summer storm, the kind that comes in sideways and turns parking lots into shallow lakes. She'd moved the car twice already, trying to find a spot where the cracked window didn't leak. She couldn't. By 10 o'clock, there was a slow trickle running down the inside of the rear door, and she'd wedged every spare piece of clothing she had against the seal. Tobias had finally fallen asleep despite the noise. Marcus was awake, sitting very still, watching his mother try to mop up water with a McDonald's napkin. "Mom," he said. "Yeah, baby. We're not really camping, are we?" She stopped what she was doing. She looked at him in the mirror, those serious eyes, that careful face, and she understood that she had been insulting his intelligence for 7 days. "No," she said, "we're not." He was quiet for a moment. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes," she said. And then, because she was his mother and not a liar, "I'm working on it." He nodded. He lay down. He closed his eyes. She sat in the driver's seat in the rain and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed. That was when someone knocked on her window. She startled badly. Her heart slammed up into her throat, and she turned to see a man standing outside her door, an umbrella over his head, rain sheeting off it in curtains. He was in his 60s, she thought, with a gray beard and the careful posture of someone who had spent a lot of years opening doors for other people. He was wearing a dark jacket with a small embroidered logo on the chest that she couldn't read in the dark. He made a small gesture. "Can you crack the window?" She hesitated. Then she cracked it an inch. "I'm sorry to startle you," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. My name is Arthur Pell. I work for a gentleman named Wesley Broom. He owns the building across the street, the one with the lights on the top floor." He paused. "Mr. Broom would like to speak with you, if you're willing. He said to tell you that if you're not willing, I'll walk away and not bother you again." Odette looked at the building across the street. It was a brick office building, 4 stories, not new but well maintained. The top floor had lit windows even at this hour. "Why?" she said. "I honestly don't know all of it," Arthur said. "Mr. Broom has an office up there. He works late most nights. He's been watching the parking lot." He paused again. "He says he recognizes something." Those were his words. "He says he recognizes something." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the building. She looked at her boys in the back seat, Tobias asleep, Marcus with his eyes closed, but his breath too controlled to be sleeping. "I'm not leaving my kids," she said. "He didn't ask you to," Arthur said. "He has a meeting room. There's a couch. They'd be comfortable." She sat with that for a moment. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. Wesley Broom was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. He was 67, compact, with the kind of stillness that comes from having spent a long time learning not to waste energy. He was sitting behind a desk that was almost aggressively ordinary. No glass, no chrome, just old wood with visible watermarks from 100 coffee cups. And he stood when she came in and shook her hand like she was someone he'd been waiting to meet. Arthur had set the boys up in a corner of the room with a blanket and a tablet loaded with cartoons. Tobias had woken up just enough to accept the situation and fallen back asleep almost instantly. Marcus had sat down carefully, looked at the room, looked at Arthur, looked at his mother, and then looked at the cartoon and decided, provisionally, that this was acceptable. "Sit down," Wesley said. "Can I get you anything?" "Arthur can." "I'm fine," Odette said. He nodded. He sat down. He looked at her directly, which she appreciated. She'd had enough of people looking slightly to the left of her face, the way people do when they're uncomfortable with a situation they've decided isn't their problem. "I'm going to ask you something directly," he said. "And I'd like a direct answer. How long?" 7 nights, she said. He didn't react with the expression she'd seen on people's faces when she'd told them. The mixture of pity and discomfort and the faint suggestion that something must have gone wrong on her end for this to happen. He just nodded. "What do you do?" he said. "I'm a nurse. Cardiac. 12 years. "Why aren't you working?" she told him. She told him the whole thing. The schedule request, the write-up, the HR complaint, the resignation, the flagged file, all of it. She told it the way she'd learned to tell hard things. Plainly, in the right order, without performing emotion, and without suppressing it either. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "There are things I can offer you," he said. "I want to be clear about what they are and what they're not." He leaned forward slightly. "I own 3 medical office buildings in the metro area. I also sit on the board of Ridgeway Community Hospital. I have no authority over hiring decisions, but I have relationships with people who do, and a word from me in the right direction carries weight. I can make that call tomorrow." "Okay," she said. "I also have a property, a rental house, 3 bedrooms, in Midtown. It's been sitting empty for 8 months because I haven't gotten around to dealing with it. You could stay there, 60 days, rent-free. After 60 days, if you're employed, we negotiate fair market rent. If you're not employed, we figure something else out." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. Same word she'd said to Arthur in the rain. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 32 years ago I was living in my car. I was 25. I had a daughter who was 3 years old and a child support payment I couldn't make and a contracting business that had collapsed under me because I'd trusted the wrong partner." He picked up the coffee cup on his desk, looked at it, set it down. "A man named Howard Purcell gave me a job. Not charity, a job. He paid me a fair wage and he let me prove what I could do. And I did. I built everything I have from that point forward." He paused. "Howard Purcell died in 2019. I've been trying to figure out how to pay that back ever since." Odette looked at her boys in the corner. Tobias had gotten tangled in the blanket in his sleep, and Marcus had quietly reached over and straightened it without taking his eyes off the cartoon. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I'm not looking for someone to fix my life. I know how to work. I just need the obstruction removed." "I know," Wesley said. "That's exactly what I'm offering." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll take the housing," she said, "and I appreciate the introduction. But I'll ask for the job myself. I just need the name." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. "Fair enough," he said. The house on Idlewild Avenue needed work. The kitchen faucet dripped, the backyard was overgrown. The water heater took 4 minutes to warm up, but it had 3 bedrooms and a porch and a yard with a fence. And when Tobias walked through the front door the first morning, he stopped in the middle of the living room and turned in a slow circle and said, "Is this ours, for now?" Odette said, "But we get to sleep inside?" "Yes, baby, we sleep inside now." He thought about this. "Even if it rains?" She crouched down and held his face in her hands. "Even if it rains." Marcus walked through every room by himself, quietly and thoroughly, the way he approached most things. He came back to the living room and said, "The bathroom has 2 sinks. I know. We only need 1. I know." He was quiet for a moment. "We should probably use them both anyway," he said, "just so they don't feel lonely." And then he went to find a soccer ball in the box of things she'd pulled from storage. And she stood in the middle of the empty living room, and held herself together by sheer will for about 30 seconds before she went into the kitchen and let herself cry where he couldn't see her. The name Wesley had given her was Dr. Patricia Holden, Chief of Nursing at Ridgeway Community Hospital. Odette called her office at 8 the next morning. She was told Dr. Holden was in meetings until noon. She called back at noon. She got the assistant again. She left a message. She also sent an email. She wrote it the way she used to write incident reports. Specific, chronological, no unnecessary language. She laid out her credentials, her experience, the situation at St. Catherine's as factually as she could state it, and what she was asking for. A fair hearing. Nothing else. Just a chance to be evaluated without the shadow of a flagged file she'd never been formally told existed. Dr. Holden called her back at 4:47 that afternoon. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. At the end of it, Dr. Holden said, "Can you come in on Thursday?" She came in on Thursday. She wore the spare set of scrubs she'd kept at the bottom of her duffel bag through all 7 nights in the parking lot, laundered twice now, and pressed with the iron she'd found in the Idlewild house's hall closet. She sat across from a panel of 3 people: Dr. Holden, a nursing manager named Jeff Quartermain, and a woman from HR whose name Odette forgot as soon as she heard it, and she answered every question clearly and without defensiveness and without performing anything she didn't feel. At one point Jeff Quartermain said, "We did speak with St. Catherine's. I assumed you would," she said. The feedback was, he paused. "Mixed. I would imagine it was," she said. "I filed a complaint against my supervisor before I resigned. I'd do it again." No one said anything for a moment. "Tell me about your patient outcomes in the cardiac unit," Dr. Holden said. She told them. She had numbers. She'd kept records. Not because she'd anticipated needing them, but because she was the kind of person who kept records. Readmission rates, patient satisfaction scores, incident documentation. She'd saved everything to a cloud drive before she left St. Catherine's, and she pulled it up on her phone and turned it around so they could see the screen. Dr. Holden looked at the numbers for a moment. Then she looked up. "Can you start Monday?" she said. She started Monday. The first months were hard in the way that starting over is always hard. Recalibrating, proving herself to people who didn't know her, learning the rhythms of a different floor in a different building with different protocols. She was the new person. She was 41 and the new person. She was fine with that. She had been the experienced person, and she knew what it was worth, and she knew she would get there again. She got there again. By the following spring, she was running continuing education sessions for the newer nurses. By the summer after that, she'd been asked, not told, asked, to take on a senior clinical lead role on the cardiac floor. She said yes. She negotiated the salary. She got what she asked for. She was still in the house on Idlewild Avenue. They had renegotiated to fair market rent 6 months after she started at Ridgeway, as Wesley had promised. It was manageable. It was good. The kitchen faucet no longer dripped because she'd fixed it herself the 4th Saturday after they moved in, on the grounds that she had time and YouTube had tutorials. Marcus made the travel soccer team in the spring. Tobias, at 8, had developed a passionate and inexplicable interest in weather patterns and spent most of his free time checking weather apps and reporting conditions to anyone who would listen. It was, Odette thought, probably the parking lot. 7 nights of rain and thunderstorms and a cracked window, and her younger son had decided the only reasonable response was to understand how weather worked. She didn't tell the boys the full story for a while. Not because she was ashamed of it. She'd made peace with the fact that hardship is not the same as failure, and that surviving something intact, with your kids intact, is its own form of success. But because there is a time for every story, and the right time for that one wasn't while they were still in the middle of it. She told Marcus when he was 12. They were driving to his soccer tournament, a long drive, the 2 of them in the car in the early morning, and he said, out of nowhere, "Mom, do you remember that summer when we slept in the car?" She was quiet for a moment. "I do," she said. "I knew it wasn't camping," he said. "I know you did." He looked out the window. I didn't say anything because I didn't want you to feel worse." She kept her eyes on the road. "You were 9, she said. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you were handling it. You always handle it." She thought about the night in the rain, the napkin, the cracked window, the moment she'd told him the truth for the first time. She thought about him folding his brother's jacket into a pillow every single night without being asked. "I was scared," she said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't handling it from a place of confidence. I was scared and I kept going anyway." He thought about that for a while. "That's what handling it is, though," he said. "Right?" She smiled. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly what it is." Wesley Broom sent her a text on the 2-year anniversary of the night Arthur had knocked on her window. She didn't know how he remembered the date, but he did. It said only, "Hope things are good. Howard Purcell would have liked you." She read it 3 times. Then she saved it. There is something people say. It takes a village. Pay it forward, one act of kindness, and sometimes those phrases wear smooth from use and stop meaning anything. But sometimes you are 41 years old and you have 7 nights of parking lot behind you and a 9-year-old who already knows how to fold a jacket into a pillow. And someone knocks on your window in the rain, and you understand for the rest of your life that the village is real, that it shows up, that it knocked and you opened the window, and that was the whole thing. You just had to open the window. There are an estimated 172,000 people living in their vehicles in the United States on any given night. Most of them are working. Most of them are not where they are because they stopped trying. Most of them are one knock away from something different. Odette Crain knows that. She drives past the Walmart off Highway 61 sometimes, not on purpose, just when the route takes her that way. She never stops, but she always looks at the far corner of the lot, the one with the good drainage, the one she chose because she'd done her research, the one where her youngest son decided to become a weatherman and her oldest son decided to grow up early so she didn't have to do it alone. She looks, and then she drives on, and she goes home to the house with 2 bathroom sinks, and she lets herself be grateful without letting herself forget.